welcome guys to Tales from the Front. This entire panel is designed to be sort of a recounting of the tales of the hydrogen cycle. It's to sort of tell the stories that you don't see necessarily if you're not inside the belly of the beast. Because what we found in OpenDaylight, the community that has emerged in OpenDaylight, is a profoundly valiant community. It's an endless array of stories of people striving to do things, reaching beyond what they thought was possible, achieving those things, and helping each other in getting there. And so those are the kinds of stories that I like to recount here. This panel is actually designed to be participatory on the part of the audience. The entire point here is to actually get these stories recounted from the people who participated, some of whom are hopefully here in the audience. So I wanted to open up with a little bit of a recount in a little greater detail of one of the stories that Neela mentioned yesterday in his keynote, which is, I'll be a little more specific than Neela was. And that's the story of how the OVSDB project started. The OVSDB project started because we had Brent Salisbury, who probably many of you know, and if you don't, you should. He's a wonderful human being, who had been an ardent supporter of OpenDaylight from the very beginning. He blogged early about how to use OpenDaylight. He was supportive. It was wonderful. He was very excited about it. And he wandered into the IRC channel one evening and basically said, you guys should do OVSDB. Someone should do that. And the response that came back, and I think I was probably the one who responded, was, you're someone. But I have no idea how to do this. He's like, I don't know, I don't program in Java, I don't quite know how to start, et cetera, et cetera. And then the response back was, that's fine. Let me tell you how I would do it if I had the time. And we listed out a bunch of steps, and we sat down and he started working through them. And he started writing code. And then about 2 o'clock in the morning, he got stuck. And so we got on a WebEx, and we got him unstuck. And it proceeded from there, with him learning and growing and building something that's turned into something absolutely amazing. And as he went on, his enthusiasm recruited other people into that project and helped to move that forward and get that growing and get them plugged into the Neutron plugin and a whole host of other things. And what it really came from was his willingness to try. His acknowledgement, in fact, that he had the power and agency to make a change in OpenDaylight. Because fundamentally, that's what you see in open source, which is that anyone who is willing to put in the effort to make the difference, to make the change, can actually do so. So, that's sort of my first story from the front on all of this. The stories of people, helping and being helped and doing valiant things. So I know we're going to have some folks drifting in and out. We had a little bit of scheduling stuff going on here. But what I'd actually like to do is open this up somewhat to the audience for other people in the audience who are participants in Hydrogen to talk a little bit about their experience as well, to sort of share stories of their interaction with the community, the things that they've seen other people do that were striving and succeeding, stories of other people helping and moving forward and overcoming difficulties. And I've got a whole boat of them. I can go on for a long time, but I'd really like to get other people involved in the telling of the tales. So is there anyone out there who would actually like to recount something from the hydrogen cycle? Don't be shy, it's fine. I have a mic. All right, I'll do another one. So this one's much more recent, and we actually have Hideyuki here in the audience. So as we're going into the release cycle for Hydrogen, one of the problems we had was how do you do a dry run of cutting release artifacts in Maven? This is something that once you've done it for a particular release version. And we had a process that had been worked out to a point using the Maven release plugin by Giovanni Mio. The problem with it was it would only get you to the very first step. And from there, you just had to cross your fingers and pray that this was going to work, which is a very uncomfortable place to be. And so we're working together as a group. We're having our release meetings. Folks are moving forward and doing the one piece that they know how to do for the release plugin. And we wander into our meeting at 5:45 Pacific time, which I don't even know how inconvenient that time is for you, Hideyuki, in Tokyo. and Hideyuki sort of pops up and is like, oh no, I found the magic flag. The one that lets it ignore the thing that makes you so you can't go all the way through the process. You can actually run the entire thing through to the end. And that piece of insight, that extra work that you did, actually made it possible for everybody else to get to a place where we could do the release artifact cutting that we did on Monday. And that was a huge thing for us. So thank you very much. It was a huge move forward. So, so again, is there anyone else who would like to share a story from the audience, from the hydrogen release cycle, about people helping each other, about people overcoming obstacles, the kinds of things that we did to assist each other? All right, I have another one. So I don't know how many of you who were following sort of the stuff that was going on with the OpenFlow plugin. It ended up being a somewhat of a tougher slog than we thought it would be getting it done. And so as we're working on the OpenFlow plugin, we're getting down to the last couple of weeks of the OpenFlow plugin. We're just a few weeks out from the release. We're doing daily bug scrubs. So we're showing up together every day. We're reviewing the bugs that we know about, who's assigned to them, when they're going to be getting them done. We're sort of desperately moving towards the release. And we show up one morning, and there are these strange people who have assigned themselves to our bugs, who we don't know. A group of folks from TCS, from Tata, had started picking up bugs from OpenFlow plugin, and this was amazing. This was wonderful, because we have these extra people who want to help, and there's only one slight complication, and that is, we have a release in 2 weeks, and we don't know when they're intending to get these bugs done. So what we ended up doing there was we assigned the bugs away from them, and we sent an email. And I got this response back. Basically, sent an email to the folks who'd been assigning themselves these bugs from Tata and said, hey, we're so incredibly happy that you're here. And we really, really appreciate your desire to help. Could you come to our calls so that we actually can sync up? Because we want your help. But we do need to make sure these things get done, these bugs get done before the release. And I got a response back from Amit at Tata, and he basically said, absolutely, we'll totally be there. We're happy to help in any way we can. And so they showed up. And the first thing they did was they started picking up the stuff that we didn't have anybody to do, right? So we were having trouble finding folks to go back and validate bug fixes. And they were like, great, we can go do that. It's a great opportunity to learn how these bug fixes get done. So they started validating bug fixes, and then they started picking up bug fixes. And literally came in the last couple of weeks and were hugely helpful, up to and including, I don't know how many of you ran the controller with the OpenFlow plugin 3-4 weeks ago during development. The logs were rather large. There were a lot of things being logged. And Priyanka from the Tata team came in and went and did all of the resetting of the log levels to something reasonable, which is a huge amount of work. It's not particularly fascinating work, but it's incredibly important. And to have folks simply come in and help at that level is quite amazing. It's quite astounding. Yes?
So for folks that are they're inspired, they're interested, what is, they want to help, what is the right mechanism to engage?
So,
Jump on a list, call someone?
so it varies somewhat from project to project. So most projects have a mailing list. So if you send an email to the mailing list saying, hey, I'd like to help, that's one good way to plug in.
Where do they find it?
So the mailing lists are at list.opendaylight.org. So you can go there. Another really good way to plug in, and this is the way a lot of people have plugged into the project, is to go to the IRC channels. We have pound.opendaylight, but many of the projects have their own channels. pound.opendaylight.ovsdb, pound.opendaylight OpenFlow plugin, pound.opendaylight list flow mapping. We actually have started keeping a list of them on the developers getting started page. So you can come into those. Those are interesting because the IRC channels you're plugging in will vary somewhat depending on the locus of time zone of that particular project. So for example, the OVS guys are mostly in North America, so they're kind of active during the daytime in North America. The OpenFlow plugin guys are mostly in Europe and India. And so they will tend to be much more active in the middle of the night from the North American perspective. And of course, vice versa as you're trying to plug in. Also, different projects will have different ways that they sync up. There's a Google Hangout that the OVSDB project does. The OpenFlow plugin team has done frequent calls where basically they get together to walk through the spreadsheet of what they're doing, coordinate, discuss issues that are technical and architectural about how they're going to be achieving what they're doing. And every project has a page on the wiki which will often point you to these resources if you'd like to get involved. And with most of these things, there's a very well-defined on-ramp. You know, you show up, there's always stuff to do. There are always people who are interested in helping you do it. So it is a very accessible community and a very friendly and welcoming one. So, again, do we have anyone else? I don't know if we have any of the other developers wander through. Let me think. So, other things that I can flesh out in somewhat more detail. So, the cutting of release artifacts, again, was substantially difficult. There was a lot of effort involved. We had a meeting on IRC. A whole lot of people showed up at this meeting to go walk through and do the work of getting these release artifacts cut. Because what may be less obvious to folks who are just consuming OpenDaylight is that OpenDaylight is 12 independent projects that we put together into 3 editions for you. And of those projects, you were looking at about 250 separate OSGI bundles that get loaded, all of which have to come together in the release edition. And so we wound up having all kinds of folks to come together to work on these release artifacts and get them out the door on that particular Monday. You had tons of back and forth as people came in and came out trying to help each other get through whatever obstacles were occurring. We had a gentleman named Robert Varga who showed up and just kept pushing patches through to help people. This is what your problem is. Oh, you're seeing that error. I've seen that before. Try this. We had people like Ryan Motes, aka Regex Boy, who likewise was helping people through stuff. We had tons of folks show up on this particular IRC channel event, and we pushed most people through. Except one project. We had one project, SNMP for SDN. They're based out of Taiwan. And the person who was working on that project had stayed up till 2 o'clock in the morning to come and do release artifacts, which in and of itself is an epic achievement. Her name is Christine. And she had stayed with us as long as she could, because it ended up taking several hours, and then finally had become disconnected and had gone back to sleep. And we wanted to make sure that her artifacts were released so that that project could be part of the simultaneous release. So the time rolled back around, back around to daytime Taiwan time. Chris Wright, who is a board member, a TSC member, and an employee at Red Hat, agreed to stay up and see if he could help her along. Now, Chris is a fabulous guy, and he's an extremely talented programmer. But his background is actually more in kernel programming than in the intricacies of Maven and Java, although he's facile there. But it's not his native technology. And so there at the very end, what you had was Chris Wright and Christine on the IRC channel after everyone else was gone, with Chris progressively helping Christine through working through the issues she was having, getting her final release bundles cut, and sending her patches to try and fix things, and discovering whether they worked or they didn't work, and going back through the logs of the previous things that people had done to get this done, and figuring out what problems may be reusable. And in an area that wasn't necessarily his area of expertise, the two of them together in collaboration got those release bundles cut. We were able to have SNMP for SDN in the final release, and we were able to cut the release editions that you guys have now. So this was, in some ways, really amazing. You have someone who works here in North America at a completely different company, who actually has no particular interest personally in that set of technologies, working with a set of problems that are not his native problems, and succeeding in getting us as a group completely across the finish line together so that we could all be successful together. So I'd like to pause and sort of throw things open and see if there are any other folks in the audience who would like to share sort of war stories from the dev cycle, valiant things that people did, ways in which people helped each other that were unexpected, above the call of duty, and completely normal for us. So anybody want to share any stories like that? Got a mic. Cool, thank you. Go for it.
Hey guys, I'm Brent Salisbury. A couple weeks ago I went to Red Hat, and so that's where I am now. We had so like Ed was saying, it's, we're kind of, we started this off as this kind of loose group. There was like lots of speculation on, oh, this person, everybody's got an agenda, and all this kind of stuff. What we've kind of turned into now, and I can honestly say this from the user side, is kind of like, we are quickly gelling into a pretty tight family. I was talking to somebody last night, and I was like, how do you compare this to OpenStack? He was kind of ground floor on OpenStack. He's like, he sees a lot more tightness here, so that's pretty exciting. I think we probably all stay up all night and all grind through ridiculous hours, and we probably all need to go to the doctor and figure out blood pressures and things like that afterwards. But it's the great thing about the community is, we're not demoing products here. We're not demoing anything other than passion. So, regardless of people's skill sets, regardless of people's backgrounds, we really are we're gonna change things just because of that passion. Doesn't matter who you work for. It's pure community. So there's some good stuff. The stories are pretty long. Most of them involve,
Go for it.
Me calling Ed in the middle of the night, or, me calling Madhu, or Giovanni. I mean, it's just, Ryan. These kind of staples of the project. And it's not because they're getting paid to do it. It's because we're all here to kind of. We finally have this opportunity to do something in networking, where it doesn't have this big long cycle of a year to get a feature. Now it's a matter of months to get a feature because we're going to go out and figure out how to do it. It's obviously slightly. Probably one of the neatest things I think is in the middle of the night we'll say, how are we going to do this? Because we've always done it this way, but does that even make sense? So that's where kind of community comes in. So we'll literally get on IRC and say, the 10 people that are awake in the middle of the night from various time zones, like my friend Haduka, what do you guys think about this? How should we implement this? So that's where the community really comes in. The more input from you guys, and it doesn't matter what your skill sets are, whether you have we've got people from networking, guys like me with a networking background that are, rolling code. We've got plenty of examples. We've got plenty of people that are, willing to help. But yeah, I mean, it's obviously going to take the community. I just got out of a painful, VirtualBox DevStack demo, and it's those kind of things. And me and Madhu are in there helping Kyle out with it. My VirtualBox blew up yesterday in my demo, so we all fail together at times. But the important thing is we're giving it a shot, and we all have a good laugh about it. So. I'm too frazzled to even have really good stories right now, but so I just encourage everybody to come join us because we are going to change things regardless of speculation and anything. Just nothing matters. The code speaks for itself. The company doesn't. So code is king. Code is the coin of the realm. And I think originally the ITF credo was. Rough consensus and running code. It's kind of gotten away from that. And there's crazy reasons why. Most of them are legal, but we're definitely bringing it back to that. And our goal is to simplify a lot of this stuff because it's really complex. We're talking software. It's this fundamental shift of we have protocols today, and that's math. Eventually, those things become consistent. Here, we're talking software, so. Testing and those sort of things are what are going to save us as opposed to necessarily mathematical algorithms. So one thing just on the as we're moving forward, roadmap stuff, input. We all have 5, 6 things in our pocket that we have to get done prior to next releases. You guys help us either add to that list or prioritize to that list or actually implement that list. So really encourage you guys to join us. So, yeah. That's all I got to add.
No worries. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hey. Okay. So, yes.
Yeah, I have a question. I'm not a contributor or anything like that.
Yet.
Hearing you guys talking about going to see the doctor, blood pressure, et cetera, there's certain of us that are a little bit, that it's a little bit closer to home.
Mm-hmm.
And for others, it's because we've been around the block a few times. I'm curious if you, Brent, or whoever would talk about, I understand and do the staying up all night, et cetera, how absolutely severe is it? So like if I'm considering contributing, I'm encouraged by the thought of passion and everything.
Uh-huh.
And then I think about my cozy slippers and so I guess I just, I understand the comments.
Yeah, no. It's absolutely. So it's a very valid question. And the thing you have to understand is that, so effectively, all contributions are valued, and there is no requirement or expectation that you kill yourself. I actually have a story that's very similar to that's very close to this, right? And I apologize because I don't remember the gentleman's name, but it was a beautiful thing, right? So over the Christmas break, there's this very old bug that I had filed a long time ago, bug number 3. And bug number 3 was that there was a bug in the run.sh script where it was not handling spaces in path names very well. So if you happen to download OpenDaylight and unzip it on your Mac into your user directory /MySpace documents, run.sh would lose its mind. And there's an easy workaround for it. Most people weren't running into it. It never really bubbled to the top for somebody to work on. And so over the Christmas break, I get this patch from this developer who basically was saying, hey, I was just looking for a little something to get involved, and I saw this bug. And I'm pretty good with shell, and it's not that hard a thing for me. So I went through and I figured it out, and I submitted this patch. And this guy was just dipping his toe in the water, finding something useful he could help with. He wasn't staying up all night. He wasn't killing himself. He wasn't running a deadline. He was just reaching in to help because that's what you do, right? So you absolutely do not have to kill yourself or run long hours. There are a few of us, frankly, who got a little bit crazy there during the hydrogen cycle because there were things we passionately believed in that we wanted to do, that we wanted to get done, and so we ran hard together to bring them in, to bring them together, to make sure, for example, that the OpenFlow plugin stuff for 1.3 support came together, and that the OVSDB guys could do the creative things they wanted to do with multi-table programming in order to get there. So, I mean, it's just, there's no requirement for that level of stuff, but it is a very passionate community. And there is that danger of getting carried away. Did that answer your question?
No, it did, yeah, it's great. So, when you get involved in volunteer type stuff,
Uh-huh.
whatever it might be, we all know who have done that, that is the 5% of the people that do 95% of the work. And so what I was looking for, which you answered, is, you stick your toe in, does the machine suck the rest of your body in?
No. There's a deep appreciation of what you can offer, of what you can actually do. We've had people who stepped in and just helped out by building documentation templates when we needed them. We've had people who stepped in lots of small ways, to help fix this, to fix that. Hey, I noticed this thing was happening algorithmically where you're doing things that take way more cycles here than you need to. That kind of thing. Because one of the things you often do if you're a code person, right, and you're just kind of understanding a code base, you pick up the code, you read it. It's a literate kind of thing. And sometimes you read things and it's, you find something that's not quite right, that you think could be done a little bit better. And so you just push a patch. It's a really easy thing. And it's also a very low, not only is it low cost for you as a developer, you can't hurt anything. Because when you push a patch to OpenDaylight, it goes into our code review system, and a whole suite of build and run tests get run against it as a verification before a reviewer even looks at it to see if the code makes sense. It all happens automatically. So your patch is not going to break the build. Your patch is not going to break the tests. We know that already, right? So it's a very safe environment to make contributions because not only are all the automation things going to protect you, but there are going to be people with more experience in the code reading your patch, possibly offering suggestions for improvement to it before it actually goes in. So did that? Yeah, yeah. But it's also a relatively low barrier to entry if you actually have something you want to do. So another good story from all of this is there's a member of the community named Andre Carlson. And he wandered in, I guess in September, into the IRC channel, and he'd been poking around at things. And he sort of made this comment, which I'll roughly paraphrase as, your UE sucks. It's really terrible. Now, I'm not necessarily going to agree with that comment, but in the course of conversation, what it came out was that he felt that what we ought to do with the user interfaces was rather than having something that had a back-end piece in the server and a front-end piece in the user interface in the web, that what we really ought to do is have a bunch of JavaScript that just talk to our REST APIs. And so there was an encouragement to this. It's like, okay, you just told us our UE sucks, and maybe you're right, but if you have this opinion, we want to support you in doing something different. And so he brought a project proposal, which eventually got named Deluxe. The naming process was its own epic tale. It went through 6 names in the course of trying to figure out what they wanted to call it. And brought a project proposal, not a hard thing to do in OpenDaylight, put it up, 2 weeks for public review. Everybody was basically down for the notion that if somebody thought they could do a UE better, we wanted a better UE. Got his repo provisioned and whatnot, and has been working on Deluxe. Now, it was not something that came in a time frame for the hydrogen release, because he started somewhat later in the process. But it's still actively going. They've just decided they're changing their direction a little bit about how they're doing it. There are people who are committing and contributing. And that's almost sort of an example of something where things aren't running as hot in terms of people running very, very long hours because they weren't racing against the hydrogen deadline the way everyone else was. So, but low barrier to entry, and what it really comes down to is if you see a problem, you're empowered to solve it. And there are people who will support you and people who will help you get there. So I'll throw it open again because we keep having people wander in and out. Are there people who would like to share sort of war stories from the hydrogen release, sort of tales of the valiant things that people have done, the ways that people have helped each other? I'll bring one out to you, Rob.
Thanks, Ed. So my name is Rob Dolan. I'm from Microsoft. And one of my favorite parts of OpenDaylight, and OpenDaylight is generally the community. And my best memory of participating in OpenDaylight is attending the Hackfest in Portland that happened around the same time as OSCON. And about 16 of us piled into the hotel van and went to downtown Portland to get donuts at Voodoo Donuts. And I remember me and Ed and Colin Dixon and Chris Price and a bunch of guys from various companies that are sometimes collaborative and sometimes competitive all just went out for maple bacon donuts. And it was a really great aspect of, I thought, OpenDaylight in the community, that all these folks that were working together or were from companies that sometimes work together and sometimes don't, all just went out and had donuts together. And it was a lot of fun, and I think that helped that going to that Hackfest, and I've heard there's talk of having another Hackfest coming up soon in a few months, and having the chance to meet folks face to face and get to know Ed, get to know Madhu, get to know a lot of the other contributors really helped when I'm on the IRC and I recognize, oh, that's that person. And some of us even swapped phone numbers where there was a bug. I remember I called Ed, and Ed and I had a 15-minute phone conversation about a particular bug, and I thought that was, the community is a really great aspect of OpenDaylight, and I'd encourage folks to not only participate in the IRC, which as far as I can tell seems to be going 24/7, but also participate in the Hackfests when those are available, whether you're able to attend in person or whether you're attending via some of the remote opportunities that are offered. It's a great way to really get to know the folks beyond just the name on the IRC channel.
Thank you, Rob. So yeah, I remember those maple bacon donuts well. They were extremely delicious, and I don't get along with gluten, so it was not my best plan ever. Maybe just a little. Yeah, and I believe we are going to be having a Hackfest in Napa at the Linux Collab Summit, I believe. So, which will be very good, because one of the things that's been really awesome and wonderful about this particular gathering is that we've had some amazing sessions with lots of people learning a tremendous amount of stuff. We had also kind of planned to get together and do some Design Summit stuff, but I think everyone who would have been doing Design Summit stuff has been busy presenting this whole time. So it's been an interesting experience in that regard. So yeah, it's, I guess the underlying point that I'm trying to get across in all of this is that we're a community that's accessible and welcoming. That even if you don't feel like you're in a position that you can contribute, because you don't feel like you have the immediate set of skills, or because you're intimidated by the code, or anything else, that's not the impediment you think it is. Primarily, what it takes to contribute in OpenDaylight is the willingness to do the work and the passion to try and achieve something and to change something in the world. And that's really what it comes down to, and that anyone in this room and everyone in this room can actually do that. And I would strongly encourage you to. If you really want to shape what your network looks like for the next couple decades, this is the place you do it. So is there anyone else who'd like to share a story? Okay. So I'm inclined to sort of just wander off, and I can talk to any folks who'd like to talk after this. Had not intended this to be so much of a sage on the stage kind of event. I actually really like things that are more interactive. But as I said, we've had some scheduling collisions that weren't anticipated. So does anyone else have any other questions they'd like to ask sort of in the big forum? I'd happy to answer anything. Okay. Well, thank you all for coming. I appreciate it.